In the previous video, we were looking at this question here, and I talked about the borrow to buy decision, and we established that the NPV of that decision was minus $3,505.08. If you look at the note, I actually rounded this number here, so I end up with 3,505. For the quiz, for the exam, I recommend actually keeping more decimals, so I only rounded in the notes because that's what the textbook does. Okay. Okay. Now in this video, we want to look at the NPV of the lease decision, right? What will happen if we lease this asset instead, and what will be the NPV if we lease the asset? In this case, you could look at the cash flows, but the cash flows will not be a simple annuities, so it's not what we're going to do. But let's just try a little bit here to think about what would happen. At year 0, okay, you will get a payment. This payment is your lease payment. This lease payment, if you look up here, the lease is $1,295. Okay, from that lease payment, then you would get a shield, a tax shield. Now, obviously, if you pay just at the beginning of the year, right? So if you pay at time 0, just when the year begins, you're not going to be able to use that tax shield until the end of the year. So at year 0, you're not going to get a tax shield from that payment. Okay, and then we can calculate your after-tax cost of leasing. And the after-tax cost of leasing is just going to be our lease payment minus the tax shield that it generates. So in this case, $1,295. And obviously, we can calculate the PV, and I'm not only going to calculate this one. This whole table is provided in the notes, and you can go there if you want, and you can look at it. I'm just going to do one row or two to explain what's going on. But in this case, the PV at time 0 of this payment, well, there's no years. We're not discounting it back any period, so it's just going to be the same as this number here. For year 1, okay, we're going to get a payment of $1,295 at the beginning of the year, and then we're going to get the tax shield from this payment, right? We're going to get that also at year 1. And the tax shield in this case, we are going to get this whole payment, right? This whole lease payment will be tax deductible. So we're going to get 40% of that whole payment. So 1,295 times 0.4 will give us $518 in tax shield. Okay, so then I'm just going to put this in here, $518 as a tax shield. So this number minus this number, we're going to get $777 as my after-tax cost of leasing. And then again, we could calculate the PV. I have it in front of me, so I will calculate it, but usually, again, you would just use your financial calculator, right? We're using a discount rate of 6%, and we can just put the FV as this number. We calculate the PV, and that cash flow is in 1 year from now, so we use an N of 1. And we would get that 733 is the PV of this this after-tax cost of leasing. And then we can just keep doing all of the other row if we want. One thing that is important that I want to highlight is row 5. At year 5, remember, the lease payment was at the beginning of the year. So at year 5, we don't get any tax payment, but we will get the tax shield from the year 4 cash flow for the lease payment. And that cash flow, all of these tax shields will be 518, and all of these lease payments will be 1,295. Okay, which means that at year 5, we will get a cash inflow of 518. We can again calculate its PV, and the PV would be 387 in this case. Okay, so you could do this whole table, but you should notice that we don't actually need to do this whole table. Okay, notice this is an annuity. This is an annuity in BGN mode because it's at the beginning of the year, right? And it's an annuity for 5 years. So we can just calculate the PV of all these payments and then calculate the PV of all these payments. The PV of these is a negative number. It's what we need to pay. We can add back to it the PV of the tax shield, okay? And that should give us the sum of all the PVs of the after-tax cost of leasing. So that's probably a faster way of going about it. than doing this whole table every time. So let's just do that, right? So step one, PV of lease payments. Okay, well in this case our N is 5, we have 5 payments. The interest rate in this case is again 6%. We established that we should use the after-tax cost of debt. The cost of debt is 10%. The tax rate is 40%, so our after-tax cost of debt, and this was discussed in the chapter about the weighted average cost of capital, right? So you should know where this comes from. That is 6%. The cash flows and the compounding in this case is yearly, not 1%, my bad, is yearly. It's always going to be yearly in these questions, so just keep that as 1, right? We want to calculate the PV. And then finally we have our payments, and the payments, we're calculating the PV of the lease payments here. The payments are $1,295. So I can just put, I do have it calculated somewhere, but I'll just put it all in for one time here. The interest rate is 6%. And so the PV of the lease payments is 5,455.01. Okay. Now, step 2, we can just calculate the PV of the tax shield. Hopefully everyone was yelling at me. I forgot to put BGN mode here. As I always say in Finance 110, I usually tell you to use BGN mode, but sometimes I forget to put it in BGN mode when I do the calculation. And when I was a student, that was my most common mistake on an exam. I would write use BGN mode on my exam, and then I would forget to put it on. So don't forget to do that. Actually use your beginning mode, right? 5,782.31. Okay. Thanks for everyone who was yelling at the camera. That helped me avoid a mistake. Okay, the step 2 is the PV of the tax shield. Okay, in the case of the tax shield, we have, again, 5 payments, right? The interest rate is still 6%, and our payments and our compoundings are still yearly. So none of these numbers change. However, the tax shield that we get is only $518 a year. It's not $1,295, okay? There's no FV again, and we want to calculate the PV once again. However, in this time, we do not want to be in BGN mode. These payments are at the end of the year. Notice I'm not in BGN mode. Already I tried to always remove BGN mode right away when I use it. We don't need to change any of the numbers except the PV, the PMT, sorry, the payment, which is 518, and we can calculate this PV. And I get a PV of 2,182.00. Okay, we are done. The NPV of this decision, of the lease decision, right? What is it? Well, we're going to receive as a cash inflow 2,182, and we are going to need to pay, right? What we're going to need to pay is 5,782.31. So this should be the NPV of our lease decision. This number minus 5,782.31. And we get an NPV of the lease decision, which is 3,600.31 negative. Going back here, I can put the NPV of lease, and the NPV of the lease decision was just what I wrote here, 3,631, so 3,600.31 negative. So I'm comparing, either I can borrow to buy at $3,500 roughly, or I can lease the asset at $3,600 roughly. So in this case, I should obviously choose, okay, the one that gives me the lowest NPV. So we should choose the borrow to buy decision. So again, the highest NPV. Now remember, some of you might say, well, Francis, this is not above zero, this is not above zero, should I not do any of those? Again, remember, we're ignoring the cash inflows here. We're assuming that we already established that getting this asset will be worth it, no matter which financing decision we take. So this asset is already generating a positive NPV for the firm. Now we're just trying to find the lowest cost way of financing this asset, right? So remember, there's no cash inflows here. There's just, well, there's cash inflows, but they're only cash inflows that are tax shield generated by our decision, right? It's basically just looking at what way do we finance that asset. So it doesn't matter in this case if we have negative NPVs, okay? In the next video, the question is not written here, but it will be there in the next video. I'll discuss what should the lease payments be in order for us to be indifferent between the borrow to buy and the lease decision. And that is not covered in the textbook.